let's look at solving an equation like this. Well, one thing I notice is if I rewrote these as variables, 2x squared minus 3x plus 1 equals 0, then I see that's a quadratic equation and I could try to factor it. So going back to the land of factoring equals 0. The middle piece is negative, this is positive, so I know we're going to have a negative and a negative. 2x and x is the only way to get that. And then, of course, the only way to get 1 is 1 times 1. And so all I've done here then is I've said, well, instead of x's, this is actually 2 sine theta minus 1. And then this piece, my x is sine theta minus 1 equals 0. Just some students like to see this better with the variables, but it's the same thing, right? Solving. And so now what I do is I set both of these equal to 0. So both factors equal to 0. Minus 1 equals 0. And then I solve for sine. So if I move the 1 to the other side and then divide by 2, this one becomes sine of 1/2. This one, I move the 1 to the other side, and that becomes sine of 1. And where the sine equals 1/2 is at pi over 6 and 5 pi over 6. And where the sine equals 1 is at pi over 2. Okay, I have a trigonometric equation that I want to solve. One of the big problems I see here is I have a cosine and a sine. And so I need to kind of think of something, and right away when I see sine squared, I think of the trig identity. So remember the trig identity, sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. Well, I could actually put this in terms of sine squared. So in other words, solving for sine squared, I get 1 minus cosine squared theta. And I can take this and replace sine squared theta with it. So let's see if that does me any good. So I have 3 cosine theta plus 3 equals 2. I'm going to replace sine squared theta with 1 minus cosine squared theta. All right, now what? Well, I see something that I could go ahead and distribute, so might as well. 3 cosine theta plus 3 equals 2 minus 2 cosine squared theta. All right, well, now I see a square here, so I know I have a quadratic that maybe like the last example, if I move everything to one side, then I actually could try to factor this. So I'm going to move this to the other side, so it becomes positive 2 cosine squared theta. Then I have this plus 3 cosine theta, and then I'm going to subtract the 2, so plus 1. All right, so to see if I can factor this, and equals 0. So I have 2 cosine theta, cosine theta. The only way to get 1 is 1 and 1. So I have my factors that I can set both of my factors now equal to 0. Theta plus 1 equals 0, and then cosine theta plus 1 equals 0. So this one, of course, when I move the 1 to the other side, it's going to become negative 1 and then divide by 2. So I'm going to get cosine theta equals negative 1/2. This one, when I move when I move the 1 to the other side, I get negative 1. And therefore, I look on the unit circle and make sure I'm not running off the board yet. And I get my 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and pi. So those would be my answers.